this video, we'll discuss how your mouth relates to sexuality, sensuality, and libido dynamics. Enjoy. In today's face reading tutorial, we're going to be discussing sexual dynamics in relation to the mouth. So I had a subscriber, I think last week, ask a question about the thinness of the lips in relation to libido and fullness of lips, and other subscribers have asked questions around this. And I've made videos on this before. I think in the past, it's been a while though. So I'm going to talk about the mouth and the dynamics to consider in relation to libido, sensuality, sexuality, that kind of stuff. So as always with face reading, please don't explicitly look at features as definitive meaning. These are symbolic markers for potential expression. And there is consistency usually with these patterns and how they express. With all that being said, the thing I want you to think about first and foremost is let's differentiate sensuality and sexuality. So a lot of times people use these words interchangeably, but if you just go online, look up the actual definition, sensuality relates to the five senses, the engagement of the five senses, and a person enjoying the use of the senses. So sensuality relates to that. Sexuality has to do with sexual activity, libido, procreation, how we express ourselves sexually, all of that. So can these two things cross over? Absolutely. The act of sex is a very sensory experience. So definitely some crossover, but the words mean different things. And typically what we're looking at with the mouth is large, full lips, especially when they're proportional, usually relates to sensuality. Now, yes, can that transfer over into sexuality? Yeah. But the thing I want you to think about is that typically big, full lips, usually there is an engagement of the senses that the person likes. It also relates to interpersonal expression. So when a person has large, full lips, a lot of times the need to vocalize their feelings, to express themselves, is usually on average a bit higher. So that's one. Now, let's talk about the differentiation between the thinness and the fullness of the lips and what that means. The way to think about this is I've talked about in my videos where when a person has very thin lips, where like neither of the lips really show and they're just kind of tight-lipped, what I've said in the past is, well, that's usually a marker for high libido. And people are like, well, why? Because the person's not sensual. If the lips are small, how does that even relate? What does that even mean? The thing I want you to think about is that the lips in relation to expression, okay? So we can express ourselves in a lot of different ways, but sexual expression is one of those. And the way I want you to think about the mouth is when the lips are very thin, there is an extraction, something being extracted in terms of expression. So a lot of times what I've seen over the years and what my late teacher used to talk about, Lillian, she used to say, when the lips are really tight, there's a squeezing out like toothpaste out of a bottle of the senses. But a lot of times what she saw is that the metrics from sensuality started to diminish the tighter the lips got, and it started to move into sexuality, and usually an extraction or a squeezing out or a compression of sexual expression. So if you think of the mouth like that, the thinner the lips, the more the expression and the metrics towards sexual expression start to increase because things are being squeezed out or made more thin. That's a way to think about it. Now, in relation to the size of the lips, very tight lips usually means often high libido. There's like a high sex drive usually. Now, when the lower lip is dominant and the upper lip is thinner, usually what they say is hedonistic tendencies, kinks, fetishes, sort of like a more robust sexual appetite, things like exhibitionism, and someone who is just very sexually liberal usually comes when the lip is showing down here. Now, when the lip protrudes and you can see moisture on the inside of the lip, those metrics go up even more. So the more protruding that lip is and the more puffy it is in relation to the upper lip, this is the general pattern that they talk about in terms of sexual expression. Now, when the upper lip is more full on top, what they're talking about usually is a drama queen or a drama king, someone who is very dramatic in their personal expression. So again, you can sort of see that the mouth has these ties to expression. When the lower lip does this down below, they're talking about sexual expression. When it's the upper lip that's a bit more full, there's sort of like a dramatic expression that comes with that. So can a person with a full upper lip and a smaller lower lip have a very high libido? Yeah, like any person can have a high libido. The mouth doesn't explicitly dictate that that's what that means. But again, face reading is about pattern recognition. It's about seeing consistencies over time in facial features and on average, what's usually the case. So the thing to remember about your mouth and how it relates to the five senses, how it relates to sexuality, is that sexual expression is very closely related to creativity. So what I tell people is if they have a high libido or they have a high sex drive or they have a mouth that shows the extraction of the senses, you have to engage creative processes because sexual energy is very powerful in the context of Eastern medicine. It's one of the things that gives us the most robust longevity, and our ability to engage in sexual activity and keep it alive is very important for our health. But if we're not in a position literally and physically to share that with somebody, say we're single for long periods of time and we're not in a sexual relationship, you have to be able to decompress sexual energy in other ways. And one of the best ways is through creativity. That can be writing, that can be painting, that can be drawing, that can be music, it can be pretty much anything that's creative in your mind. It can be landscaping in your backyard for all I care. So the big takeaway is that you have to keep these metrics in mind, but make sure that you have the capacity and the range to digest that sexual energy. If you have questions around the mouth, any of the things I've said, please put them in the comments and I'll be doing my best to answer them. All right, y'all. Take care.